The worst mistake of my life didn't feel like a mistake when I made it. It felt mature. Responsible. Logical. That's how I know it ruined me. People think regret comes from obvious disasters, bad decisions, impulsive choices, reckless behavior. But my regret came from doing exactly what I was supposed to do. From choosing the option that made sense on paper. From living the life everyone quietly approved of. I remember the moment clearly because nothing about it felt dramatic. I was sitting at a table, listening to someone explain why this was the smart path. Stable. Predictable. Sustainable. They used words like security and future, and not everyone gets what they want. I nodded. I agreed. I swallowed the feeling that told me I was about to betray something fragile and irreplaceable inside myself. At the time, I thought I was growing up. There was another life available to me then. Not perfect. Not easy. But honest. It scared me because it required belief, in myself, in uncertainty, in the idea that my inner voice mattered. Choosing it would have meant explaining myself. Disappointing people. Risking failure publicly. The life I chose instead required none of that. It asked only that I silence a part of myself and keep going. So I did. At first, everything looked fine. Better than fine. I was praised for being sensible. For not chasing illusions. For understanding how the world works. That approval acted like anesthesia. It dulled the discomfort just enough for me to function. I told myself fulfillment would come later. That happiness was something you earned after stability. That meaning could be postponed. I didn't realize postponing meaning is how you lose it. Years passed quietly. No crisis. No collapse. Just days stacking neatly on top of each other. I built a routine so efficient it left no room for doubt. And yet, every so often, I would feel this strange ache, like remembering a dream you once had but can't fully reconstruct anymore. I avoided thinking about the life I didn't choose. I learned which thoughts to interrupt. Which memories to reframe. I became very skilled at internal censorship. Whenever I felt restless, I told myself I was being ungrateful. People would have killed for what I had. That logic worked, until it didn't. One evening, I caught myself envying a stranger. Not for their success, not for their looks, not for their freedom. I envied the way they spoke about their life, uncertain, imperfect, but owned. They sounded present. That's when the first crack appeared. I began to notice how absent I felt in my own days. How conversations passed through me without leaving marks. How achievements landed softly, like objects placed on a surface that no longer reacted. I wasn't unhappy in a way that demanded attention. I was hollow in a way that went unnoticed. The real danger wasn't despair. It was adaptation. I adapted to a life that required less and less of me until there was almost nothing left to give. I became functional, polite, emotionally contained. People trusted me because I was consistent. They didn't see the cost. At night, I sometimes replayed the moment of choice. I told myself it wouldn't have worked anyway. That the other life was a fantasy. That I saved myself from embarrassment and instability. But the truth is harder to admit. I didn't choose safety because it was right. I chose it because I was afraid to be fully seen. Afraid of wanting something too much. Afraid of discovering I wasn't enough to sustain it. Afraid of standing alone with my own desire and having no one to blame if it failed. So I chose the life where failure would be slow, quiet, and socially acceptable. I didn't realize that by avoiding one kind of loss, I had guaranteed another. The moment it truly hit me came unexpectedly. I was asked a simple question, not by someone else, but by myself. If you could go back, would you choose differently? I opened my mouth to answer automatically. To defend my past self. To say I did the best I could with what I knew. But the words didn't come. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I knew that even then, at the moment of choice, I had known. I had felt the weight of what I was giving up. I just didn't want to be the kind of person who chooses longing over logic. That night, I understood something that still haunts me. You can forgive yourself for mistakes made in ignorance. But it's much harder to forgive yourself for betraying your own clarity. And once that realization settles in, the past doesn't stay in the past anymore. It starts leaking into every quiet moment, every pause between thoughts, every version of the future you no longer believe in. I didn't lose my life all at once. I traded it, carefully, politely, for something everyone else called reasonable. After that realization, nothing changed on the surface. And that was the most disturbing part. My life continued to function perfectly well without my consent. I woke up, went where I was expected to go, spoke the words that fit the situation. From the outside, it looked like stability. From the inside, it felt like living inside a script written by someone who no longer cared whether I believed in it. I tried to ignore the question that had opened inside me. I stayed busy. Productivity became my shield. If I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel the weight of what I had lost. I told myself that adulthood wasn't about fulfillment anyway. That meaning was a luxury concept, something people invented when their basic needs were already met. But the lie didn't hold. The regret didn't arrive loudly. It seeped in. It showed up in moments that were supposed to be neutral. Standing in line. Sitting in traffic. Washing dishes. Every pause became dangerous. Silence gave my thoughts room to breathe, and they turned against me. I started measuring my life in alternatives. Not fantasies, parallel outcomes. Who I might have been if I had chosen differently. Not happier, necessarily. Just more aligned. More present. More alive inside my own skin. What made it unbearable was knowing that nothing external had forced my hand. No catastrophe. No ultimatum. I had been free. And I had still chosen wrong. That kind of regret doesn't ask for forgiveness. It demands accountability. I noticed myself becoming harsher toward others. Impatient with people who still believed in their own potential. Their enthusiasm irritated me. Their risks felt offensive. It was easier to judge them than to admit envy. Deep down, I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at the version of myself who had been brave enough to want something, and then abandoned that courage at the moment it mattered most. I began to feel trapped by the very structure I had built for safety. Every responsibility felt heavier now, not because it was difficult, but because it confirmed the permanence of my choice. Each commitment reinforced the idea that going back was no longer possible. That's when the moral dilemma became unbearable. Leaving now would hurt people who had done nothing wrong. People who trusted me. People who had built their expectations around the version of me I had presented. Walking away would make me the villain, unstable, selfish, ungrateful. Staying meant something worse, continuing a lie that hollowed me out day by day. There was no ethical option that didn't involve damage. Only a choice between visible harm and invisible self-destruction. I tried to compromise. I told myself I could adjust. Find meaning on the edges. Take up hobbies. Travel more. Distract myself creatively. But these were accessories, not answers. Decorations on a structure that was fundamentally wrong for me. The emptiness grew more articulate. It stopped being vague sadness and became specific accusations. You knew. You chose comfort over truth. You let fear dress itself up as responsibility. I started losing sleep. Nights stretched longer, filled with rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Apologies I would never say. Explanations I would never offer. I practiced honesty in my head and silence in real life. The worst moments came when someone praised me for my stability. For my reliability. For having it together. I smiled and felt something inside me fracture quietly. They weren't wrong. I was exactly what I had trained myself to be. That's what made it unbearable. I had succeeded at becoming someone I didn't respect. At some point, I realized I had stopped imagining the future entirely. Plans felt pointless. Long-term thinking assumed continuity, and I no longer felt connected to the person who would inherit those outcomes. That scared me. Not because I wanted to disappear physically, but because I had already disappeared psychologically. I was surviving without projecting myself forward. Living without narrative. Existing without direction. That's a dangerous place to be. I started thinking about escape, not from circumstances, but from identity. What would it mean to stop being this person everyone relied on? Who would I be without the weight of being the responsible one? The idea felt forbidden. Almost immoral. As if wanting my own life back was an act of betrayal. I wrestled with that guilt constantly. Society rewards self-sacrifice when it's quiet. When it looks noble. When it doesn't inconvenience anyone else. I had sacrificed myself so well that no one even noticed. But the body notices. The mind notices. The soul, if such a thing exists, keeps score. The breakdown didn't arrive as hysteria. It arrived as clarity. One morning, I looked at my reflection and felt a sudden, sharp grief, not for who I was, but for who I would never become if I stayed. That grief was heavier than fear. I understood then that doing nothing was also a choice. One that guaranteed a specific ending. The question was no longer whether I could fix my life. It was whether I was willing to accept the consequences of finally being honest, with myself first, and everyone else second. And for the first time in years, the answer scared me less than continuing the lie. Because I had learned something devastating and freeing at the same time. You don't get endless chances to choose yourself. Sometimes there is only one window, and if you don't jump, you live the rest of your life explaining why you didn't. I stood at the edge of that realization, knowing that whatever came next would cost me something I couldn't recover. The only question left was I ready to pay for my life with my reputation, my comfort, and the version of myself everyone else preferred? I didn't announce my decision. There was no dramatic speech, no explanation that wrapped everything neatly. I learned that explanations are often just another way of asking permission, and I was done asking. The moment I finally chose myself didn't feel victorious. It felt terrifyingly quiet. Like stepping into a room after a long party, when the music has stopped and only the mess remains. I started dismantling my life slowly. Not out of strategy, but out of fear. I needed to make sure I could still breathe while doing it. I reduced commitments. I stopped promising things I already knew I wouldn't be able to give. Each small withdrawal felt like tearing a thread out of a tightly woven fabric. People noticed. They asked questions. They grew concerned. I gave partial truths. I'm tired. I need space. I'm figuring things out. None of it was a lie, but none of it was the whole truth either. The whole truth was too destabilizing, for them and for me. When I finally left, it didn't look like escape. It looked like irresponsibility. Confusion. Weakness. I watched trust turn into disappointment in people's eyes, and I let it happen. That was the price. Freedom doesn't come with applause. It comes with misunderstanding. The first weeks after I stepped away were brutal. The silence was no longer shared. There was no routine to cushion the days. No identity to fall back on. I woke up with no script and no validation. I had wanted this, and yet I had never felt more exposed. Regret didn't disappear. It changed shape. Instead of mourning the life I hadn't chosen years ago, I began mourning the damage I was causing now. The people I was hurting. The image of myself I was destroying. There were nights I almost went back. Not because I believed in that life again, but because familiarity is seductive when everything feels uncertain. Returning would have been easy. Apologies can be convincing when people want stability more than truth. But I knew something had shifted permanently. Going back would mean teaching myself, one final time, that my inner voice was negotiable. I couldn't survive that lesson twice. The rebuilding didn't look inspiring. No sudden clarity. No immediate sense of purpose. Just small, awkward steps toward honesty. Toward choices that weren't optimized for approval. I learned how uncomfortable it is to live without a ready-made justification. How naked it feels to say, "This matters to me," without knowing whether it will work. Some days, I felt alive in a way that almost hurt. Other days, the guilt crushed me. Both were real. Both were part of the cost. What surprised me most was this: the freedom I gained didn't erase my past regret. It reframed it. I stopped asking, "Why did I choose wrong back then?" and started asking, "What am I willing to choose now, knowing what it costs?" That question is heavier, but it's honest. I lost people. Some quietly drifted away. Others left angrily, convinced I had betrayed something sacred. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had. But betrayal cuts both ways. I had lived for years betraying myself politely, invisibly, in a way no one could object to. This time, the damage was visible. And visibility, I learned, is part of truth. The life I live now isn't impressive. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't sound stable when summarized. But it's mine in a way my old life never was. I still carry regret. Not as a wound anymore, but as a reminder. A reminder of what happens when you confuse fear with wisdom. When you trade aliveness for approval and call it maturity. If you're listening to this and waiting for a sign, this is not that kind of story. I won't tell you to quit your life. I won't promise relief or clarity or happiness. I'll tell you something harder. You will live with the consequences of your choices either way. The only real question is whether you want to live them as yourself, or as someone you became to avoid discomfort. I chose late. I chose imperfectly. I chose at a cost. But I chose. And that, after years of quiet self-erasure, was the first truly honest act of my life. If I have one regret left, it's not that I changed everything. It's that I waited so long to believe that my life required my consent.